So this is my presentation on monitoring student growth through writing. And I just want to start by putting my classroom in an instructional context. I was teaching 7th grade social studies and language arts, and it was kind of an integrated classroom with, we kind of mixed the two subjects together, and we did some language arts and social studies and some social studies and language arts. They kind of flowed together. And then my students were, as I said, 7th graders, and we taught them 1865 to the present, U.S. history. And my unit was the war unit. So I was in charge of teaching the Spanish-American War to the Cold War. And my students had varying ability levels, varying abilities to turn in assignments, varying, there was a large gap in not only ability levels, but also in socioeconomic levels. That was probably one of the biggest disparities that I saw. Was there were some students that were they were from single family homes and very poor, and then there were other people that were, other students that were, had a lot more resources at their disposal. And so that was kind of, I was dealing with a large mix of students, as well as dealing with inclusion, because the school I was teaching at was fully inclusive. And so I had 2 students that were severely disabled, so they did not participate in this writing assignment that I assigned to the rest of the class. I also had 2 ELL students that were from Mexico. One, he moved from Mexico as I was student teaching, and then one, she moved from Nepal as in the beginning of the school year. So that's a little background of my classroom. I decided to give them short writing prompts in class because of the lack of some students turning in assignments or doing any work. So I wanted to get the most back that I could. So I decided to do them in class. They were interpretive, they were short assignments based off of either a quote or something to kind of push them to the next level of thinking about a topic that we had talked about that day or over 2 days. Prompt 1 dealt with World War I, and it dealt with U.S. SOL. That was what World War I and time continuity change. Prompt 2 was presented after a 2-day discussion on the major leaders of World War II, and prompt 3 was presented as a lesson after we had talked about the Cold War for several days, and also we had already talked about and looked at the Civil Defense Administration. So here's prompt 1, and it says, think about the discussions we have had on our war and any prior knowledge you have of World War I. World War I began in 1914 and ended in 1918. It was often referred to as the war to end all wars. Think about this quote and write a response. Some possible questions to consider as you craft your response. What does this quote mean? What would a war described as this way look like? Why do you think many people thought of World War I in this way? So with this prompt, I wanted to try and activate students' prior knowledge and see what they knew about World War I. And I also wanted to see what they were kind of thinking about war, because at this point we hadn't talked about World War I, but we had done a foreign policy spectrum when we had talked about war. So I wanted to see what they knew about war and what a war like this would look like. And so I was also looking for the fact that they answered the question. I was looking for whether or not they gave historical details, if they used proper sentence structure, but I didn't, when I gave this to them, I just handed it to them at the beginning of class and didn't say anything. But those were the things that I was looking for. I did not grade this assignment. Prompt 2 was presented to them. We had talked about the Axis leaders the day before, and then we had talked about the Allied leaders the day I gave it to them. So they had a full context of the leaders of World War II, and so after this, I wanted them to kind of think about these fascist leaders that we had talked about the day before, and then why didn't the good guys, the United States and Great Britain, fall to fascism. I wanted them to, again, activate their prior knowledge of the Great Depression, thinking about that transition from Hoover to Roosevelt and how things could have gone differently. And so I wanted them to think about that, and I also wanted them to kind of further think about our government structure and how our sense of nationalism is ingrained in us. And then prompt 3 was given after civil defensive photos and also a duck and cover video that was presented in the 50s by the Civil Defense Administration. So here I really wanted them to, I knew this was higher level thinking, and I knew that a lot of the students would not get this prompt, but where they would take it at face value and not really think further. But I did, what I was hoping to challenge the students was for them to think about the atomic bomb and the response, what happened to the Japanese people based on the atomic bomb, and thinking about that. Do you really think that the duck and cover videos and Civil Defense Administration posters were going to save them? Why do you think that the Civil Defense Administration was created? So those were my 3 prompts. My students that I looked at closely, student A was Megan. She is a mid to low B student, so she's a fairly good student. She lacks total confidence in her work. And she would ask me from little assignments that they were doing in groups that didn't matter at all to that weren't being collected really, and she would ask me if she was doing it right, and she was very concerned about doing things right, and then she would also question me on more difficult assignments. So it was a range of assignments that she questioned, and she always wanted to be doing her best, but she kind of struggled a lot with her assignments. So my goal in picking her was to see if I could, by giving her feedback, maybe push her to succeed more and feel more confident in her work. And then student B, Dylan, is not gifted, but he was invited this year to be in the gifted program. He's quiet, and he doesn't say anything really in class. He will occasionally raise his hand, but for the most part, he doesn't say a whole lot. And his writing, he was short and to the point, said as little as he could, but he got it done. But I wanted to challenge him to show all that he knew and provide those extra details that he was kind of missing in some of the previous assignments that I had seen. So if we take a look here, this is Megan's first response. And in all 3 of her responses, she states her reasoning. She says how she feels, but then she doesn't really, especially in this one where she was supposed to describe what this war would look like, she just says it would be big, really. And so I wanted, in my comments to her, I wanted to encourage her to plan more, because I felt like if she thought more about it before she wrote it down, then maybe she would have a better idea of it. So that was kind of my starting off point to her. And then here's Dylan's response again. I liked what he had, but he said it was a bloody war, and it was bigger than any war anyone had ever seen, but I wanted to challenge him to give more details. And here's the second prompt. And now with the second prompt, I did read it to them. So she does, again, she says that our democratic tradition would give us strength. And then I do see what she's doing here by saying that our resources were stronger. She's kind of trying to channel our discussions of imperialism and colonialism, is what I was thinking. But she doesn't really talk about, I was hoping she would more talk about how we were struggling just like them, but we had maybe give more details about why we wouldn't fall to fascism. And so I tried to be positive, but also on the back, you can't see it, but on the back I did say, structure your writing, think about it, plan it. So to give her some constructive criticism as well as positive feedback. And then here, Dylan wrote a lot. He wrote a lot more, and I love his. He says that the gangster nations of the fascist gangster nations didn't affect Great Britain and the United States because our democratic traditions were so strong, and that would defeat the whole purpose of us fighting the revolution, basically. So I really liked his response, and I tried to show that in my feedback to him. And then for the third response, I presented them with this rubric, this rubric I have been grading all along in this way. Whether they answered the questions, evidence, and examples provided, the sentence structure, and capitalization and punctuation. But I put this up on the Smartboard prior to giving them their third prompt, and I kind of explained to them what I was looking for. And so in this third prompt, we see that Megan attempted to edit her work, which I hadn't seen before, and so she was thinking about. That shows me that she was thinking about her response. And again, it's the same. She was one of the students who kind of took this question at face value and didn't take it to the next level, but she still answered the question and provided details to support that. And Dylan, he totally got what I was going for. He said the duck and cover would be useless in case of an atomic bomb, so he was understanding, and he referenced the atomic bomb and the radiation poisoning and things from Hiroshima and Nagasaki that I hoped that some of the students would. So he was successful. I also provided them feedback on the last response, even though. So I learned from this that rubrics are important and feedback on student work is important, because even though Megan did not really show the growth that I hoped for, Dylan did, I feel like, and so I still think that feedback is important, and I think it's important to provide them with a question, provide them with positive feedback, and also things that they can work on in responding to their work. And then I also found that it's important to read the directions to them, because they provide you with a lot better responses. So in the future, I would provide the rubric in the beginning and show examples show what I wanted from the students in the beginning, and maybe after the first one, I would show an exemplary response to the rest of the class so that the rest of the class knew what I wanted. And I thought in grading them, maybe if I wrote my own response to know more about what I wanted from them, that could help me assess.